Where's my... All right, welcome back. This next talk by Michael is about GraphQL. Just messing. I ran out of ChatGPT jokes, so I just figured I'd throw you a curveball.
It'll tell you some more.
All right, awesome. Well, let's give it up for Michael.
Awesome, thanks. It feels great. Is that the signal? This was the signal for me to start. Hey, thanks for filling the room up. This is my very first time speaking in London, very first time leaving the States. And I'm just super excited to be here. Very fortunate for the opportunity. So having you all with me, I think it deserves a selfie. So if you have a silly face that you like to make and you don't mind being on my Twitter feed, then we're doing this. 3, 2, 1. Why were you so silent? It's weird. Yeah. Awesome. Let's go ahead and kick this off. My name is Michael Liendo. I am a senior developer advocate for AWS. Specifically, I work on the AppSync team. This is going to be the GraphQL side of AWS. We're the cool kids on the block because we are serverless, but we're part of the front-end web and mobile group, so we get to dabble in just about everything. I specialize in the sort of SaaS / indie hacker startup field. So if any of you are in here because you're like, I want to have a side hustle and I'm trying to make some money, this is going to be the talk for you because we're going to dive into that. So cloudy with a chance of GraphQL, right? If anybody's seen the movie, you get the reference. But we're going to be talking about all of these services here today. Now, don't worry. If you see these icons and you're like, what the hell is up there? One, it's just an amazing movie. You got to watch it. And two, these are going to be the services that we're talking about today. We'll go through each of those, but just to give you some heads up. As I mentioned, Michael Liendo. I go by Focus Otter online. You could pretty much find me anywhere on the internet if you search that handle, no space in between. And as I mentioned, first time being here, it's amazing. I'm still getting used to not getting hit by a car when I cross the street. Like looking this way, it's the wrong way. And then, you can typically find me at your local taco stand as kind of my thing. All right, so quick heads up on what we're going to be talking about today. We have, what is a SaaS application? Specifically, we're going to be talking about a micro SaaS application, something that I think everybody should have, even if you're employed, especially if you're employed these days. Typical solutions. What are people doing out in the wild after I've spoken with dozens of customers to see how are they scaling their application? What services are they using? And where AWS fits in the mix with all of that stuff. We'll actually dive into those services and then we'll do a demo towards the end showing how all of this sort of comes together in a real life application that I've been building over the past couple of weeks. Okay. So let's kick this off because we got to do some level setting here, right? Like there's SaaS, software as a solution, but then there's micro SaaS. And that's something a little bit more niche. Now, a couple key points that I want to go ahead and point out from this slide. One, the scientist there, he's super cool, but he's actually what I see from a lot of the customers that I engage with. You have this sort of person looking all cool with their headphones, focusing on what's in front of them, aka the front end, and then they just have this big, scary back end that they don't really want to touch or dabble with, so then they often pay for another service to do that for them. Nothing wrong with that. It allows you to get set up very, very quickly in your application. But when it comes to a micro SaaS, that's really the focus. How fast can I deliver this thing so that way we can have a single solution, which is the micro part of it. But at the end of the day, I'm trying to deliver value and I'm trying to make sure that I can scale this over time to $5,000 to $10,000 monthly recurring revenue. Now, a couple key figures in that. Oftentimes you'll hear, and maybe not the MRR, but you'll hear the customers, right? I'm trying to get my first 100 customers. And that's great, but something that we're going to be touching on throughout this talk is what does it look like when you have your next 1,000 customers? How are your pieces scaling with you as you get that sort of growth. So I saw this tweet. Now, I'm not going to shame anybody. It sounds like some of you saw it as well. Yeah, there are some services up here, and you tie them together so that you have essentially this Frankenstack of a side hustle. Nothing wrong with that, right? If you want to go ahead and stitch together your next great idea with 6 very different providers so that one is handling auth and one is handling your database, etc., that's fine. A lot of customers find success with that. I'm just worried about how this is going to scale in both price as well as performance. Now, a couple key players in here, the ones that are in red, I work at AWS. We are very customer obsessed. We don't really care too much about the competition. We focus on solutions. So I put those in red so that way we're not getting bogged down in who's who on the naughty list. Other players that aren't in red, they're common stuff, right? You're going to need to style your application, and they're using AWS, so I thought I'd include them. Now, I'm going to keep touching on this, but there are a couple pros and cons when it comes to having a setup like that. The first one is that it's great. I mean, it's very quick to get that set up. You can have a weekend side hustle started on Friday, and then you can deploy it live to the world on Monday. Now, they offer simple and powerful integrations. Now, there's a little asterisk there because while they're simple and powerful, they do come with a caveat of maybe not having the best free tier limits. And you sort of see that when you get to their pricing models. They give you everything you need up front, but maybe not everything you need down the road. So there's day 1, but then there's also day 100. Also, when it comes to stitching these together, you have to be careful because what if one of them goes down and you've done all the manual work of putting them piece by piece in this puzzle, but now you have multiple points of failure, and I'm not cool with that, right? I need the whole thing to work. Otherwise, I need to go ahead and stitch those together myself. And then, of course, as I touched on a couple times now, the cost, it actually can quickly escalate depending on who's using your application, who's triggering what, or how many users you have. A big one is going to be with auth in particular. Oftentimes, they charge you by the amount of customers that have signed up to your application, but that doesn't differentiate between who's paying and who's just signing up to your app, right? It's something you have to think about. Now, okay, I played that side. I showed you the tweet. We talked about the pros and cons, but to be fair, let's go ahead and see what this looks like on AWS, right? Okay, so you have this handsome customer who is going to go ahead and go to this Next.js application. Great. These are going to be all the services that it would take to get a micro SaaS up and running on AWS. This is a very, very common stack because of both performance. It's fully managed. It's serverless, which means that the cost and the scalability go hand in hand. So we are going to be talking about most of these. Some of these we don't have to bother with, right? There's Lambda. I think a lot of us in the room are probably familiar with a serverless function. But for the vast majority, we're going to have to touch base and see how this fits into the general pipeline. So what are the pros and cons here? Well, they're quick to get set up. You might not think that because if you're going through the AWS console, which can be intimidating, if you're doing that, then yeah, it's going to take you some time to get up and running with that. But I'm going to show you what I use whenever I'm building out applications and what I see customers finding the most success with. Also, we offer simple integrations. It's AWS. All of the services go hand in hand with one another. So when it comes to having my auth provider talk to my API that talks to my database, it just kind of works because it's all under the same umbrella. And then the pricing. This is actually very, very important because it comes down to what services that you're picking. I'm choosing to pick the ones that are serverless. I'm choosing to pick the ones that offer free tiers and that are fully managed. The less code I have to write, the better the world is. And I like to keep it that way. But then there's also a single point of failure, right? This is in the con area, but there's an asterisk there. So if all of my resources are deployed in one region, what happens if that single region goes down, right? Well, the cool thing is that I can deploy my application to multiple regions, including my database. Our database, which is DynamoDB, offers global tables. So it'll just sort of cache at a various network. Manual stitching still happens, still got to do it. Can't really get away from it. The way that AWS works is that our services very much so act as independent startups. So just like some insider knowledge for you. All of the services that we have, they're pretty much just a very well-funded startup. So we had to stitch those together. Not so bad because, again, they're under the AWS scheme, but it's something you have to keep in mind. And then the cost can quickly escalate. Right? If you don't pick the right services, then you have to be mindful of what's happening. Am I setting up EC2 instances, which is a server? Right? We're not doing that here. We're purposely not doing that here. So that way we can avoid that issue altogether. Okay, so you're not used to AWS. You log into the console and you see this, right? You're like, I don't know how anybody new to AWS would ever go through the 200 plus services and be like, these are the ones that I need. You kind of have that tribal knowledge, like somebody has to tell you. So to be fair, this isn't even all of the services. I wanted to get the meme in there also. So we have about 2/3 of them. There's still another 50 or so that are missing. But yeah, it's a lot. But the reality is that as you saw from that architecture diagram earlier, there's really only 6 or so that you need. And that's what I see a lot of customers finding success with, both internally in my own personal development, but then also out in the wild with customers that are scaling to thousands, if not millions, of operations per second. So what is the magical tool that brings us all together and that just makes setting up AWS so much easier so that we don't have to click through the console? Well, it's going to be another AWS service called the Cloud Development Kit, or CDK. The reason front-end engineers find it so compelling is because it allows you to write your code in TypeScript. So instead of clicking through the AWS console, you simply define what you need in a language that you're already familiar with, because let's face it, TypeScript is a new cool kid on the block, and that's just what we like to use. So in this example, we are setting up a database. Right? This is a DynamoDB table. It's a NoSQL table. And we just give it a name. We say, hey, how do you want to bill? I want to bill, just bill me per request, which is the on-demand billing. And then I set up a partition key. Everything in my database is going to have a unique ID. Now, of course, this isn't doing justice to what a real world database setup would look like. I'm just simplifying it because this is what is required. You can, of course, get very fancy with how you set up your database, but this is all you need to get started. Next up, we have an S3 bucket. You saw above that that's going to be handling our images. All you need to do is just tell it what scope in your application you're working with, and then give it a name. Okay, so going back to that architecture diagram, what are the services that you should really focus on? Which, in another way of saying it, what are the services that you don't need to worry about when you're trying to scale to, again, $5,000 to $10,000 monthly recurring revenue? Well, the first one actually isn't even an AWS service. Right? What about your payments? If I'm trying to make money, who's going to be taking the money? Use Stripe. This one is actually the most obfuscated one that you can have in your pipeline. I'm using Stripe because I am a big fan of how they do their billing and how they have their integration set up. But there are other fantastic providers out there, such as Lemon Squeezy, Clerk, and then other new kids on the block as well. What we're seeing right here is one of their newer features that I just really, really love. It's their Stripe pricing table. So what you do is you just go to the Stripe console, you tell it what prices you want, you say, hey, put these in a table for me, and they give you the code so that you can put it in your application. The other part that we'll see in the demo is going to be the customer billing portal. This is a managed solution where the customer will get a login link, and then they decide what plan they want to be on, if they want to cancel, change their card, etc. Really, really cool, because if you've ever had to wire that up yourself, you know how much of a pain it can be. Okay, so on to the AWS services. The first one is I want my customers to log in. In fact, a common flow that you see is that before you even go to sign up and use the services themselves, before you pay, you need to set up an account. So we use Amazon Cognito to do all of that. What you're seeing right here is real world CDK code that I see in all of my applications and as well as customer applications. What we're doing here is we're just giving our pool, essentially where we're going to store all of our users. We're giving that a name. I'm saying, yeah, go ahead and let them sign themselves up, AKA let them create their own accounts. We'll come back to that Lambda trigger, but then one thing that if you ever implemented sign up and auth yourself, you've probably forgotten is, hey, what happens when my customer forgets their password? At AWS, we call this, all of this stuff right here, undifferentiated heavy lifting. Essentially, that means undifferentiated, what are the things that are common to most apps, and heavy lifting, but they're hard to do. That's the stuff that we take care of. That's why we have so many services. Going down the list, you can kind of read from the schema here what's happening, right? Certain attributes are required. Then we do verify their email as well. This is done through code authentication. So they line in, or they sign in, and then they get sent an email with a code. We talked about this earlier, but we have DynamoDB in the mix. This is actually a real world scenario here where, sure, you have a table, you have that set up. It is being partitioned by an ID, which is great. That allows you to get a certain item from the database because the IDs will be unique. But what happens when you need to get all of the products from your database from a certain user? Well, in that case, we add what is known as a global secondary index. Essentially, it says, hey, I have this database. It's modeled this way. Go ahead and just flip the fields so that that partition key is going to be something else. Really powerful. A lot of customers, if you're not used to AWS, you might have tossed away NoSQL databases because of this aspect, but it's something that we do have, and customers just kind of always take advantage of it. Things that you'll point out, or that I'll point out rather, are going to be the pricing, right? You get 50 gigabytes per account per month, which is kind of crazy when you think about it because we don't charge for the accounts that you have. So if you ever get high in that aspect, you're just creating another, create another account, and then you get the free billing all over again. Highly performant, fully serverless, it's managed for you. Then we have the crown jewel, and this is near and dear to my heart because I'm heavily biased because I'm on the team. But this is going to be AWS AppSync. It is the newer service. It's only been out since 2018, I believe, which is 2 years prior to when I joined. But you can see the sort of benefits that you get. When you first create your AWS account, most services give you a 12-month, 1 year free tier plan. The one when it comes to AppSync is going to be 250,000 queries and mutations per month. We also give you WebSockets out of the box. You just set up your API and you get both an HTTP endpoint as well as a WebSocket endpoint for real-time stuff. Not only is it serverless, but it's functionless, which is kind of crazy. We do a lot of direct integration so that when it comes to your API talking to your database, essentially there's no Lambda, there's no server, it just goes. And that's sort of the benefit of having it underneath this AWS umbrella. These services can talk directly to one another. In addition to going from the API to the database, you can also go from your authorization to your API. So I don't want everyone calling these endpoints, so I can protect it with Amazon Cognito. And you'll see, actually you can see right here in the screenshot, that directive that at AWS Cognito user pools, that says automatically, and I can get more fine-grained if I wanted to, but it says nobody can call this endpoint unless they are a signed-in user, unless they're in my user pool, simply by having that line of code there. If GraphQL is somewhat new to you, I forgot to do my poll at the beginning. Just note, we have queries, mutations, and subscriptions. Queries are your get operations. Right? Mutations are how you're going to be changing data, updating, deleting, that kind of stuff. And then we have our recipe, which is going to be the product that we're trying to sell. You'll see that in the demo. AppSync is worthy of more than just one slide, though. So that was the schema aspect. But if you think about it, this thing is sitting in the middle of my entire pipeline, right? The front end needs to know about the API. The database needs to know about the API. So it's Gonna do a lot. In the last slide, you saw how the schema was set up. This is how that direct integration is going to be set up. It looks like a Lambda function. You write it in JavaScript like a Lambda function, but it's not. The team did some really smart and clever things so that customers can have that feel. But at the end of the day, we bundle it and it gets transpiled into a common language known as VTL, so that customers don't have to write that ugly stuff, and it just sort of talks to whatever service you try to get to. In this case, the data source is going to be that database that we set up earlier, but you can also have it talk directly to a Lambda function. We can also do an HTTP endpoint, so you can just give it an arbitrary endpoint. In addition to RDS, a lot of fans love using GraphQL with RDS, things of that nature. And then here in the request, this is essentially when you go to the database, do something, in this case, get the item, which is cool, like anybody can do that. But then if I'm doing if Christian, who is a coworker of mine, if he and I are both on the application, I don't want him, I love you, Christian, I don't want him to be able to get the items from my recipe store, right? That would be bad. So essentially I'm saying a quick check. If context.result.owner, essentially if the person that is trying to get this item doesn't equal, and then this is the cool part, context.identity.sub, that subfield is verified. It's coming straight from Cognito. And this knows that it's there because I had that at Cognito user pool. So that value is not going to be something passed in from the front end. That would be bad. It's going to be coming straight from the service itself. And then the last part, this is how you sort of piece it together within the CDK. So writing TypeScript, give your API name, tell it where the schema is at, and then be like, hey, what's the default authorization type that we're using here? It's going to be a user pool that I'm passing in as props. And then are there additional types? So I can have public users, in a sense. I can have custom users. I can have a Lambda function that calls some crazy other auth provider, right? And I can just write all my business logic in there. It's very forgiving. So let's take a moment to reflect on that stack, okay? Let's kind of walk through it here to see what's going on. This person, me, is going to this Next.js application. Cool. They're going to see a landing page. It's going to look fancy like every other landing page out there. And then we're going to use something called the JavaScript, amplified JavaScript libraries. These are going to be our bindings. It's going to allow our front end to talk to our back end using a set of configurations that you'll see in just a moment. That back end goes to Cognito. The user is apparently trying to sign in. And then we have a Lambda trigger. Now, this is sort of the glue that a lot of customers miss when they're trying to do this themselves. So we have that top Lambda trigger, which essentially says if a customer is trying to create their account for the very first time, that's cool. Cognito is going to put in a username, a sub, and as well as their email. But in a SaaS application, you want to know more, right? You want to know their subscription trial and whether or not they are on the tier plan, pro tier plan, and other additional information like that Cognito just doesn't handle. So in this case, we fire off a Lambda function to go to another database, a user table, and that's pretty much our source of truth in terms of what the users look like in our application. You see AppSync in the middle, just as we described, it's going to be talking to Cognito and our database. Down below, you have our S3 bucket. If I'm making a recipe application, I would probably want to store images there. A couple of key points to keep in mind is that those images from S3 aren't optimized at all. They're just there. So I'm going to use CloudFront. CloudFront's going to cache the images if I wanted to do that. But then I'm also going to say, you know what? I'm keeping track of all the images within my account. But I'm also going to use Cloudinary because even though CloudFront will cache it, Cloudinary has this really cool feature where you can give it a public endpoint. And whenever you request an image from Cloudinary, it will go to that public endpoint and just transfer the image and serve it to you on demand. So definitely take advantage of that. A lot of customers aren't aware of that, but I work closely with the Cloudinary team, and that's something that they definitely emphasize as a best practice. Then lastly, on the end, anytime a customer creates a subscription, updates it or deletes it, you see Stripe on the far right-hand side. which is going to fire off a Lambda function and update the user table. Okay, I feel like that was a lot of talking. Let's go ahead and go with the demo. Perfect. Real quick, we're gonna hop into localhost. And we have this SaaS application that I made, right? Typical SaaS app, you wanna have a compelling intro. We're gonna be selling recipes. So this is what we have. You can go ahead and get started today. Typical stuff that you'll typically find, I feel like I'm saying typically a lot, is after you have your landing page, you're going to have sort of your features, have a testimonial, and then a footer. This is true for most of the applications that I see. User's gonna sign up. We're gonna talk to Cognito. Create the account. Boom, boom. My social security number. I was wondering, does that joke land in the year? Yeah? Okay, cool. I'm creating the account. So far, this user is not in my user pool. So I'm gonna go ahead and get this code. There we go. One.
Is that email there? Is that will add with incognito or something?
It is, yeah. Cognito will, when you are in development, and you don't have to be in development, but something to keep in mind is that email that I just got sent, I never actually set that up. Cognito will give you 200 per day out of the box. So as you're getting up to speed, you don't have to worry about anything higher until you're ready for prod. Check it out, my user pool. I'm gonna bump up the size real quick. If I refresh this, boom, I have a user now within my user pool. That's great, but I should have someone in my database as well. Here is that database, no one in it. Let's run it. You see that I have the customer ID. This is that webhook that got triggered from my application. I'm setting them to prospective, so this is not Stripe doing anything. So then back in my application, I was lazy and I didn't create a route. So let's go to recipes. Nothing crazy to see here. I just want to show off a couple of endpoints. One is going to be this customer billing portal. Right now, this customer is, oh, I'm sorry, did I not price this out? I'm skipping ahead. Customer created their account. You can only get here if you have a correct login. So let's put them on a trial plan. 4-2 all the way. 4-2. I'm not even going to pretend like I know what you all are doing with the postal code situation here. It's throwing me off. So this is going to be a free tier. So right now, recall that I was prospective, right? So this is Stripe. I'm no longer on my web page. So when this gets done processing, thank you. If I go back to my database, it's prospective currently. And if I refresh, we're now on the recipe basic, and we're now trialing, okay? Over my application, sorry, I need like 2 more minutes. Over my application, now if I go to that recipes page and I try to update my subscription, Stripe billing portal is going to kick in. Again, I'm off of my website. It knows my email address. I'm going to click send. This is the scary part where I show you all my email. Cool. Got it right here. I'm going to click log in. It takes me to their own self-managed billing portal, and I have all this cool stuff that I can work with. I didn't have to write any of this. I can update my plan, cancel it, change my card information. I'm going to switch off of the trial plan over to this $7 a month Recipe Pro plan. Quick confirm on this. A webhook should get triggered, and then from there, my status should change from Recipe Basic to Recipe Pro. allowing me to then on my front end be like, oh, this is a verified user. We can give them the pro features. Just gonna verify this real quick. And there we go, Recipe Pro, we're now active. I have a full working SaaS application. At this point, all the other operations are simple CRUD functionality. I'm gonna switch back to the slides and wrap things up here. Current slide. Cool. Quick word. I purposely went down the route of choosing a micro SaaS because, to be honest, a lot of my friends and colleagues found themselves in situations this past year where they needed extra income all of a sudden. And I think a lot of us know about friends and colleagues that may be in a similar situation. So I understand that the services here could be new, could be daunting, but I assure you that when it comes to reliably and securely setting up your application, this is the tried and true way. And hopefully, as you saw, it doesn't take too much effort. The code is open source. I do this to help out the community. So hopefully, if you find it valuable, check me out online. But with that, thank you for your time. And it's been a great time in London so far.
Thanks, Dan. If you have any questions, you can ask him out in the hall. Daniel's up next. Daniel, where are you? There you are.